to the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. Today, we're going to dive into packaging. We have with us our insiders, Laurie from Oushinery.
Hi.
Seb from Troly.
Good morning, boys and girls.
And a special guest, Santiago from Packamama.
A grateful guest. I'm not sure special, but thank you for having me.
Santiago, tell us just a bit about, we want to dive into all the topics around packaging, but first, what is Packamama? What are you guys tackling?
So Packamama is a packaging company in the wine industry that first and foremost protects Mother Earth. We're in the midst of a climate crisis. It is a genuine emergency. I'll address some of the points later, which I think are, they're important for the wine industry, they're important for packaging, but they're important for humanity's continued existence on this planet. So Packamama is, as I say, it stands for Packaging Protecting Pachamama, or Mother Earth. But we also protect the contents and address consumer convenience and other needs. We can address more, but that's also in summary. So challenging the status quo, not because the status quo needs to be challenged, but because the status quo is too high carbon footprint.
And we covered Packamama a few podcasts ago, and you have a flat wine bottle. Is that the way you describe it?
Yes, we summarize as eco-flat. You called it a flat plastic bottle, and it's one point I'd like to pick up on in this chat, because not all plastics are created equal. And as a wine podcast, you'll know the difference between different grape varieties and how complex that can be. Polymers, there are not as many as there are grape varieties, but they're equally complex. And so it's very unhelpful when looking at products produced from polymers to just call them all plastics, because it would be the same as if I asked Seb now, Seb, you've got a choice of 7 different vehicles. Which car are you going to choose? And you need to make an environmentally friendly choice. Seb is likely to say, but Santiago, what's the difference between the cars? And that's the problem when you say you've got a bottle just made of plastic, because pre-existing or 100% recycled PET is a wonder material for reasons I can explain shortly. It's very different from other materials. If we were producing a bottle of polystyrene, I deserve probably to be shot. But that's not what we're doing. So we can pick up more on it later.
So are you talking about, can the plastic be recycled? Are you talking about how the plastic's manufactured? What makes a good plastic?
Yeah, so generally speaking, PET is a great material. If the material which looks like plastic, but if normally on a packaging container, it includes the number 1 in the chasing arrows, that's polyethylene tetraphthalate, which is summarized as PET. The packaging used for mineral water bottles or Coca-Cola bottles. But a lot of that is virgin material, so it encourages the greater extraction of below ground carbon, which needs to stay there because we've got enough above ground carbon and above ground virgin PET to recycle it, which is why I tend to use the term we use pre-existing material to create our bottles, because nomenclature sometimes can be complex, and recycled and recyclable sometimes get confused. So our bottle is recycled. That means it comes from pre-existing material. It's recyclable, means that after the consumer has finished drinking, enjoying the wine, they can put it back into recycling system and recycle it again. You could also add the word recyclate, and that is a material made from recycled content. So too many words are too similar, making it a bit unduly challenging. But the important point, it's above ground carbon, it's pre-existing, it's material that otherwise risks going to incinerator or landfill. It's food grade, it's BPA free, it's inert, it protects wine for up to 2 years in our instance, as we use a special weight and blend with an oxygen barrier. So pre-existing, very low carbon footprint, strong, transparent, recyclable, inert. I'd argue no better material for the wine industry other than wines that benefit from celery. So those
Yeah.
should stay
So
in
I think
glass.
Seb, you were saying the other day that recycling plastic is a scam.
Yeah, look, the whole
Are there
idea,
problems
and
with that?
I
Does
was
that
going to
work?
ask the I think my understanding of it all is that the different types of plastics are recycled differently, and the only way to know about that different type is really when you look at the actual logo. There's a number associated with it, right? And the challenge is, my understanding of it is that different cities, different waste management facilities around the world have different capabilities, right? So some facilities will be able to recycle the plastic type number one, others will be able to recycle 1, 2, and 3. And I'm pretty sure that number 6 or 7 or whatever it is, the last one, nobody can. So it's really never recycled. Is that about right, Santiago? And,
Yeah.
and your bottles, are they recyclable everywhere on the planet, or is it only downtown Sydney, downtown New York, downtown Toronto that they have the
Yeah, so it's a
facilities?
great point. So you're right. Generally speaking, 7 is the flexibles, is the materials that are used for highly convenient grocery products like pre-prepared salads and stuff like that. Very, very hard to recycle, tends not to be recycled. It massively depresses the figures on PET, which is the most recycled plastic by far. Take countries like Norway, which, you know, the ultimate goal, higher 90 levels. You know, most countries 50, 60, 70%. PET is a polyester. It's the same thing used in polyester garments. So in instances where bottles, for example, will be downcycled, they'll end up being used in textiles or car parts or other things. So polyester is a very workable plastic. Yes, there are some that don't, which is why I used polystyrene as an example. PVC is a big challenge, but you know, in some instances, these plastics must be allowed because they're used for medical purposes or other items. I definitely, Seb, I recall you commenting on Laurie also. You both sound really uncomfortable with plastics when I previously heard you discuss. But I would argue that, you know, if I gave you a MacBook, the top end MacBook, if I gave you a pair of really expensive Cutler and Gross sunglasses, if I gave you luxury furniture by Cartel, you'd look at it, and also if you knew the price tag, you'd go, oh my God, £500 for a pair of sunglasses, it's thousands of pounds for a chair, thousands of pounds for a MacBook. You'd not be concerned that that's made of plastic.
I mean,
you know, it totally got
full
out of your head.
disclosure, I'm recording this in front of a piece of plastic. I got the MacBook right now. And I think what you just mentioned, I think I was guilty of putting all plastic in the same basket. Like I literally give you a quote, like not all plastic are created equal. And it's just very easy to generalize because I do think about glass, there's different levels as well, but it's easier to kind of like consider that like one material, there's glass and there's other, but like there's much more variety in plastic that way. And unfortunately as well, I think there's been bad press, if you will, on plastic that is fake recycled, like, you know, like Seb mentioned, or just sometimes like the amount of energy it takes to recycle, or how like it's always feel good for people, but actually it doesn't get done. So there's also like a lot of this like noise and chatter around it, I think right now, that is not serving like the bigger picture the way it should. So really, I take back what I said, and I think it's not all plastic are created equal. And yeah, so
yeah, totally,
still
great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. But it also, for example, I recall that there was a discussion about aluminium cans, and we're talking about packaging more generally. So I think it's important, you know, to reflect on the different options, pulp, aluminium, you know, and other materials that can be used to package products. You know, aluminium is very highly recyclable. You're right, Seb. But the extraction of virgin aluminium and the toxicity of bauxite is a major issue that one needs to contend with. When one is using glass in very close circular models, it's amazing. You know, if wine is being produced locally, approximately 100 kilometers, and being consumed, then probably looping glass round is, you know, a far better solution than ours. But the reality is, if people listening to this will be tuning in from all across the world, and they'll be drinking wine from all across the world. And in instances where wine has such a global and long supply chain, then we need to bear in mind space, weight, and strength. because this comes back to thinking of stuff from first principles. You know, I started from a blank piece of paper. I was building an online wine business. I was having a lot of problems with broken products, and I said, like, why am I shipping wine in a round glass bottle? I would argue that if you brought smart women and men around the table and asked them to come up with a beautiful pack that protected wine, but got it easily from A to B, where A to B is across continents or across the world, they definitely wouldn't come up with a bottle that is heavy, shatters easily, and so spatially inefficient. It's like you're ticking all the boxes you don't want to tick. And so when I went back to the drawing board, I tried to address all those items whilst recognizing that if a product is not beautiful and it's facing the status quo that is beautiful, because a round glass bottle aesthetically is very pleasing. Yeah, on a dining table, it's probably the most attractive inanimate product. You need to bear in mind, yeah, the aesthetic beauty, the proportionality, you know, the length of the neck compared to the body, the width, the depth, the curvature of the shoulders, etc. So yeah, it's complex, which is why packaging companies like ours should do the hard work, so wine companies can focus on making great wine and use our packaging to slash their carbon footprint, but also sell more product. Because I'll in a moment, not now, but let's speak, I'll tell you about how things are going in Australia, because you picked us up from some coverage about our launch in Australia. But in the last few days, there's been data about how we're performing in Australia. That's great.
Oh, awesome. And I was just also curious, like when it comes to, I mean, it's very of actuality right now, but we see, you know, like the energy crisis, especially like in Europe, but extending. And, you know, we hear a lot of that of the glass furnaces, like glass suppliers that just have to put down, like turn down ovens because they just can't pay the bills. So like in terms of, because I think that's kind of new in people's perception, right? There's also the energy cost of producing material. Like we start thinking of the recycling, we start thinking of the weight of like the shipping, and until very recently, I don't think the manufacturing part of it. So when we come to plastic and your bottles in particular, so PET, is it like more energy friendly? Like what does it take, especially when it comes from starting with recycling material?
Yeah, so the easy one to remember and for your listeners to get connected with, it takes 255 degrees Celsius to reach that temperature to form a bottle in PET, whether it's ours or any other. Okay. It takes more than 1,600 degrees Celsius to form a glass bottle. That's more than 6 times the difference in energy. There's other issues with heating a furnace. It's such a lot of energy, it doesn't get turned on and off. I mean, the machine that blows our bottles is switched on and off at the wall when we're not using it. You know what I mean? It's very different. And a furnace is running round the clock because to repower that is significant. Studies show it's 8.5 times the energy difference. Use a bottle, same bottle, volume bottle glass versus PET. So a significant difference. Also moving that material for, I mean, a kilo of material, a kilo of raw material would make 2 glass bottles. It makes 16 of ours. So, you know, we get 8 times the volume. That material needs to be moved from the place of the materials. So there's all these figures that one can, that all add up. But if you just take those degrees Celsius, and sorry, I'm not good in Fahrenheit. So
me neither.
a converter, if they're listening to us from the United States, that it's so significant that it's worthy of note. But all these environment matters aside, as I say, we see performance where our bottles are beating glass on shelf, and that's great.
Is there a standard way to communicate that, to calculate that? I mean, is there some way that can be consistently calculated, or do you sort of have to just compare certain parts? And I mean, do you know what I mean? Is there a way to then calculate sustainability in a way?
Yes, a life cycle analysis. So it's basically a study of the consumption of materials, energy, water, and other things through the process of producing the material, the packaging, the product, the movement of that product supply chain, and then whether it's the retailer gate or the end of life of that product. So yes, the life cycle analysis is the commonplace system used globally to calculate the environmental impact of one product versus the other. And increasingly, we see products retailed where there's that environmental data is provided, which it's very insightful. So more people getting these tools, more retailers using them to communicate, and others. And it's a point you covered in one of your recent podcasts. Is, in a climate crisis, consumers will start to react very differently. It's very hard to see how people will see their life and livelihoods threatened by extreme weather events. They might lose friends or family to extreme weather events, and that they will continue to act as business as usual. Because, I think the most important bit of data is that we've passed 420 parts per million of atmospheric carbon, which is a measure of the greenhouse effect created that's heating our planet. And we're rapidly heading towards 1.5 degrees. A current trajectory will probably pass that, and 2 will probably head up towards 3 degrees of heating, and that would make the planet uninhabitable for all but those very few who can safeguard themselves with extreme measures.
And look, I would argue ultimately there is a way to measure sustainability. What we don't have is a unified and transparent and standardized way to do that across the globe. So different organizations will kind of will be a bit more lenient for certain measures than others. So it's really not transparent for the consumers today, right? I think ultimately there is a lot of work that needs to be done towards that. And likewise, I was reading recently around cattle and how the hive is actually used as a byproduct. It wasn't going to be used anyway, and there's a segment of the industry using it, and they're now saying, well, we're using something which was going to the trash, so the carbon footprint is not ours, right? So there's still some challenges around how carbon footprints and sustainability is being measured. But we all agree, look, the planet is not in a good shape, and we're not heading in the right direction. We need to do something.
How do you, Santiago, how do you communicate that through to consumers? I mean, do you have certifications? Is there some, or do you just communicate that to producers? What about that top part of it, getting it to consumers, that information?
Yeah, great question. But before I answer that, just quickly to respond to Seb's point, I agree. But in instances where the competitive offerings are so significantly different, I don't think consumers need that level of explanation to understand that something that feels and looks carbon wasteful or environmentally wasteful is different from something that looks environmentally friendly. It's like an electric vehicle versus an internal combustion engine. You can try to explain all the complexity about it, but most people will very quickly, and for the right reasons, subscribe to the fact that electric vehicle is the future. You can take other things, not from a sustainability perspective, but yes, it was very clear that the DVD would totally wipe VHS off the surface of the earth, because the DVD's underlying technology for the purpose of storing and replaying data was far superior on every possible measure. And so when the incumbent faces the challenge from something that is step change, not incremental innovation, so totally different, like rewriting the rules, then sometimes you don't need to explain it, people get it. I mean, I believe that most people buy a product from its convenience factor, and not only from its environmental perspective. It's just a more easy pack to have in your life, and it fits in easier, it carries easier, it works easier, it's just easier to use. And so in that instance, you have people who use it and then have that environmental benefit. How do we communicate it to the end user? Actually, we rely upon the great brands that work with us. Your listeners can't see this, but you can. I mean, this is a product from Australia, and so it's got really big messaging on the label, and then smaller icons at the bottom that explain exactly what it does. And also on the back label, there's more information about why a flat bottle made from pre-existing PET is a far lower carbon footprint solution. And so, yes, brands should do that in the short term, but sometimes it doesn't need to be as prominent as people are just using it for the convenience factor.
Yeah. And actually, that was a question I had for you, Santiago. Like, what has been like the general public/consumer like perception and like the shelf presence? You know, like obviously, I imagine it like standing out. Yeah, like what are the general public in the markets you are in? If you can remind us where we can find your bottles, that would be great as well for our listeners. But yeah, how is it being received?
Yeah, thank you. So we launched product to the world in May 2018 in the UK. We have grown much since then. So been in business for a bit over 4 years, 2 of which were a challenging pandemic. Lots of product nowadays shipped to the UK and the Nordics. I think in the Nordics, they get us very clearly because they're very environmentally focused. They also have big outdoor lifestyles. So then once again, that convenience factor works.
I lived in Oslo. I can, yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you. And more recently in Australia, where we see product selling so fast that you know, we ran out of stock, having planned properly at the beginning for an MPD product, having to rush to do follow-on productions, and in some instances the product, you know, catching up and potentially now going to beat glass. So for the same SKU with the same branding, etc. So so I think the response has been really good. As the inventor of the format, you're passionate about what you do, but in the beginning, your own peers tell you, what are you doing challenging the round glass bottle? It's been around since I've been on the planet. Like, why don't you pick an easier career? But you believe in what you're doing, so you push on despite those encouraging you to do a real job. Then you can eventually, you know, either have to get a real job or prove that you did the right job. And in my instance, fortunately, I'm proving that we've done the right thing, because it took us, we're close to 4 years to do the first 1 million units, but we've done another 1 million units in a few months this year. So it's, you know, we're massively seeing the uptick in demand as we do generally ship product. You know, many of the sustainable packaging solutions out there that are being talked around much are still niche products that will find it hard to scale. But an important aspect of ours is not only that we're sustainable, but that we're also highly scalable, which is a principle behind what I developed. I wanted to use the biggest established technologies, but push those technologies to the max, push molds to the max, push availability and use of 100% rPET. You know, doing these things, but also things like fitting into a bottling line. It's far easier.
I was just about to ask. Yeah,
it's far easier for us having to deploy in Australia by just taking our tooling and blowing bottles locally in Melbourne, but being able then to run on a bottling line that's established in the wine industry, versus having to ask somebody to bring immense amount of capex initially. That's a big ask from a packaging perspective. So things are going really well. I'm super excited and grateful. And the one thing I will add is that much is said about social media sometimes being a hive of negativity and other things, but it's also a really great opportunity when you're building a business in this day and age as a business owner to spend time looking to see what people who bought your product in a supermarket have to say. You know, better than a focus group in my view, because they're real people who purchase stuff and have found something in it so exciting that they choose to want to. And a great example is in June this year, we launched together with Accolade Wines a product called Banrock Station, the eco-friendly brand in Tesco, the UK's largest supermarket. And the reviews on there for both the red and white wine are so great. There's so much focus on packaging, which I think slightly disproves a point made in one of the recent conversations I overheard or listened in today in advance of meeting you all and chatting, is that consumers don't care about packaging. I don't think they wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to think about packaging today, but if they find packaging in their life that makes their life better, then in some instances they do jump onto social media to share it with others, and that's really good for me.
Do you have any numbers for us on the weight advantage? So a case of 12 bottles is give or take 16 kilos. How heavy is a case of 12 bottles using your bottles?
Just under 10. So
that's interesting.
So the weight of the liquid remains the same, but we're 63 grams versus an average 500-gram bottle in the wine industry. Depends where some would say 4, 6, as in cases kilo, but actually, world-respected critics and writers like Jancis Robinson now putting unbelievable pressure on producers to cut their weight. So they say in glass, at least, to use the absolute lowest volume you can use. Because to be honest, there's no oxygen barrier benefit between a 330-gram bottle and a 900-gram bottle, and that is the benefit of glass, that it has an oxygen barrier that's impermeable to oxygen. So seal a bottle properly of the right sort of wine, put in a cellar, and you'll develop all those wonderful secondary flavors that come out of an aging wine. There is, I think, some perception that a very, very heavy bottle will make a difference in people's perception on quality. And I'm not sure that I've seen any supporting data for that. I do believe that if somebody sees something like significantly bigger, then they might be driven to purchase it. I use the example of loose avocados in a basket, where there's they're all one single price, and there's one that looks really big and one that looks really tiddly, and very few would go and pick up the tiddly one. But that's an aspect of, I think, greed, which is a bit of a human trait. But I'm where people have cut the bottle weight and shared that information, they haven't seen an impact. And I know Crimson Wine Group are a great example in the US. Nicolas Quillet has shared on several podcasts I've listened to how they cut their bottle weight. They saw no difference in sales.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first arrived in Canada in 2006 and started my career as a wine label designer, it was just, I know I'm dating myself, but it was just introduction of like the Eco line by like Saverglass or Saint-Gobain, like the glass supplier. And it was like, not revolutionary, but already the discussion was there, like, oh, like it's like a less thick glass, smaller pint. And like you said, and we kind of managed to reach 500 grams per empty bottle. To give context to our listeners, when I work with clients and we're looking at more like premium glasses, it's very easy reaching 750 gram a bottle, totally empty, like no liquid in it. It's kind of insane. And so Eco Glass was 2005, 2006 in my world. And now we're just like taking steps, obviously, further when we have your numbers. And I can't help to think as well, as a designer, one of the biggest challenge we have is applying, like great graphic, great labels on this round surface. Like not so much the application, but the fact that like the field of vision, like the size of the label kind of disappears in terms of billboard, if you will, on the shelf. So I would love, for example, to design a label, like, for your product, because suddenly, like in terms of branding, you have so much more of a canvas to play with without losing the edges to, the warp of the cylinder. Just selfishly, design
totally.
standpoint.
A billboard effect. The bottle that you might have seen online, and we should definitely get you samples so you can experience in hand, has 43% of the entire surface area is flat. And so those two very large flat panels on the front and the back provide a very clear billboard effect. When they're placed in store, there's no unsure of should it be this angle or that angle. They're just placed in flat. We get 11 bottles deep on a retail shelf that's built for 6. So we get 83% more product on a retail shelf, giving more availability, ensuring product is in stock. And this is in a world still, which unbelievably still fills retail stores by hand. No one's actually loading using dispensing technologies or other mechanisms. They're just opening cartons and filling. So that once again makes a massive difference. But space is not discussed often enough. You know, we've talked a lot about material here. We've talked about weight, but I mentioned atmospheric carbon, which I'd argue is the single most important metric that people should follow, because it will determine the quality of life they live and the likely life their grandchildren will have. But also I think space, because the current bottle format is a 19th century adaptation to a 17th century British invention, the onion wine bottle, Digby's glass bottle, the first scaled wine bottle. And the population, since many probably know, but they don't think about it. In 1800, we were 1 billion people on the planet. In 1900, we were 1.6 billion people. 2000, so there's a 100-year jump, close to 6 billion people, and now we're at 8, 20 years later. So we've gone 1.668, and most of those people actually are living in urban centers, urban sprawls that are becoming very big, very, very dense concentration of people, big strain on supply chains, etc. And in that, it's a very easy win to be space efficient. It's other than lightweight and strong. So I think, using those 3 principles, then creating a product that's beautiful is important, which I heard you both talking about bottles, and will bottles remain, and does it need to be a bottle, etc., which I guess put back to you both, Seb and Laurie. My view, it should be, because you can make a bottle that's smart enough that it packs like a brick or a box. But that's pretty when you take it out and put it on a dining table. But it needs to be a very smart bottle design, which can cross pack, not just flat pack. Over to you guys. Where do you think there's going to be a future of bottleless?
I think there will be, for me, the way I look at it, I think there will be more future of hybrid, like smarter bottle. We're not talking like technology smart as in like responsive and everything, but like, smarter in its design and approach and carbon footprint. But for me recently, I've really gotten into really like, and that's also like living in Norway for a while, great bag in a box. So I'm actually curious about like the carbon, of that pouch, like the plastic in that box. And honestly, I just bought a very nice decanter, and it makes a lot of effect when I bring it to the table with my friend. So like I'm looking at it like both ways right now. The problem here in Canada is the quality of the wine in the bag in a box is very so-so. Like it's very commercial, low grade. Like we haven't had the chance yet to get some really nice wines in that format, like I've seen in Scandinavia.
Yeah, it's an interesting technology, but it's 1960s technology. The bag-in-box.
1960s, okay.
Yeah, mid-1960s. The screw cap and the bag-in-box are 1 year apart, both Australian inventions. The screw cap was taken to France by Peter Wall from Yalumba. It wasn't produced there, so it's credited to France, but the inventor is an Australian. And bag-in-box is also an Australian innovation, and the patent holder was an Australian, so mid-1960s. Problem with bag-in-box is that the bag is very, very hard to recycle, even if it's taken out. And if it's sent to its waste as a carton cover with the Met Pet bag inside and the tap on it, then it doesn't get recycled.
It doesn't. Yeah.
I don't subscribe to people pulling packaging apart when they've finished drinking 2 or 3 liters of wine. I don't even subscribe to people having our bottle goes as it is in its entirety, which is why it has a polypropylene cap and a special label and adhesive, so that the whole thing can go into recycling in most of the world, except because you asked the question for most of the world intercepts and recycles PET. And so, I think we need to be, we're talking about generally about sustainable packaging, so I think it's important to put down some overall helpful suggestions, monomaterial in the first place. So if it's aluminium, just an entire aluminium thing, which is why the can is great. way it opens, etc. It's a monomaterial product, an entire glass bottle where the cork is removed and you just have a glass container. Amazing, it's glass. We can talk about the energy needed to recycle them and move them afterwards in a second. But same thing with a PET bottle. As long as it has a plastic cap on it and the right label, it's fine. Shame on those, and I will mince my words, but shame on those who ship PET bottles with aluminium closures. There are many who do that, and that's a mess in the recycling. The collar will not be removed, and so that bottle is not likely to be recycled, and that's a shame because there are solutions that work for wine, but there are those who still ship with a traditional wine aluminium closure on a PET bottle in most instances.
Sure.
What about paper bottles is a kind of new idea that's emerged in the last, well, it seems to have hit my radar in the last few years. What do you think about paper bottles?
Like
it depends. It really depends which one. So there are some prototypes being developed by two organizations called Pulpex and Paboco, made quite famous by doing a Johnny Walker bottle and more recently a Carlsberg beer bottle. Those are pulp bottles formed, and they have currently a PET liner, so they're currently a problem, but it's not an issue because they're not shipping any, they're just prototypes. They're planning on having a bio-based liner, because of course you cannot put liquid in a paper bottle. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. There is also other technologies which are like bag-in-box shaped in a bottle. Once again, that will have the same recyclability issues if it's not handled properly. Strength, I think, is a key, one of three key aspects for packaging success in wine. And so, unfortunately, I'm not sure that if you drop that bottle, it will survive very well, and couriers are aggressive. So I'm, in summary, the world of wine needs a lot of different pack formats to be successful. There's too much of one format at the moment. I'm motivated by innovation, but we need products that are available now and that are shipping at the level that we are shipping or more, not those who talk about a potential bright future, because the planet is heating now. We see the extreme devastation in Pakistan in the last weeks. This is just going to become more and more commonplace. How long do we wait? We cannot. We must act now, and so sustainable, scalable solutions.
Sorry, I was going to ask for a winery wanting to adopt as a whole your plastic bottle, or only in part for a specific line or product, what's the cost of your bottle?
So it depends in which market. We aim to be price competitive with what's out there at the moment. But it really depends at the size of winery. We manage to work with global giants at the moment and allow them to have successful product offerings. So I assume that most smaller wineries, it will be fine. Give an example, in Australia, we provide a complete dry goods and processing package for under $2 Aussie. That's affordable for most and in line with what most are paying. Let's take the very, very biggest in the world, Gallo in California. We need to do some tweaks on our price to allow them to switch their entire range. But we're also not proposing to anybody to switch their entire product range into one single format, whether it's ours or someone else's.
So it's fair to say that the plastic bottle is not significantly more expensive, but also not significantly cheaper. It's pretty much in par, or you're trying to be in par with the glass bottle.
Well, when we scale, we'll be far cheaper.
Yeah.
So that's important for us. We use a technology that, once again, those energy savings I mentioned for 255 degrees Celsius, there's 1,600. The fact we get 1,600 bottles dry goods on a pallet, we get 1,200 filled bottles on a pallet. All these things they all add up to make significant savings. If someone is using our packaging for a brand that will be exported, there are many examples I have looked at where the logistics savings by using our format versus a round glass bottle would mean that the packaging is for free. So, you know, as I said, we've done a couple of million units and since birth. When we get to position, which is in my plans to be doing hundreds of millions of units, then at that point, you know, it's why I chose PET technology as the underlying technology. I just chose to push the flat pack benefits to the absolute limit to create a broad intellectual property portfolio, which would give us some space in which to operate and make the investments required to build this business. But you know, we use a technology that made Coca-Cola successful. Coke would have not managed to become as successful as they are today if they stayed in those beautiful, curvaceous glass bottles. It was their successful adoption of PET and can that got them to being where they are at such scale. So there are deployments of bottling lines doing 150,000 bottles an hour in PET. Never get that in glass.
No.
Well, sorry. What do you think from an adoption standpoint? You mentioned that the glass bottle has been there forever. It's a fairly traditional kind of industry to choose for you to tackle. We also have seen that, as you mentioned, the screw cap has taken more or less 20, 30, 40 years to become arguably mainstream, not exactly, but more or less. Why the wine industry, and why do you limit yourself to the wine industry? And what do you see in the wine industry is going to be your greatest challenge for greater adoption?
Yeah, so multiple questions. First of all, we don't restrict ourselves to the wine industry. We're already working on projects in mineral water and olive oil. But these are very scaled projects. They're not niche projects, so they'll take a while to get off the ground. That's why we're called Packamama. We were originally called Garçon Wines because I invented the packaging for my own business, but then saw that many others were interested in using it. So pivoted to being a packaging company, and Packamama is intentionally liquid agnostic to allow us to do more. I think using the screw cap took a long time, so changing a bottle might also take a long time. I don't think it's as an argument that has any underlying basis, because there's many examples of technologies that came around and you know, disrupted very fast. Screw cap offered some packaging benefits, but there was not a larger underlying problem with cork versus screw cap. And there's still a big argument today of which is more environmentally friendly, the carbon capture elements of the cork, natural cork versus synthetic cork versus so the corkscrew, sorry, the screw cap was for some a better closure for what they were doing, and it was more convenient. But it's very different when we're looking at something like a climate crisis and the need for wine to slash its carbon footprint, and the growing knowledge that the single largest contributor to wine's carbon footprint is the round glass bottle.
Transport, yeah.
You know, we're not surfing in a paddling pool, we're surfing with the big waves. And so if we catch one of those waves, we will surf like they do off the coast of Portugal, not like you would do in a paddling pool. So I think there's very different underlying aspects here. But, you know, we give multiple benefits beyond some sort of functional one that was the screw cap analogy. I think I answered all your questions, but sorry if I didn't.
Santiago, why don't we finish off? Why don't you just tell us how you teased us about how it was going in Australia?
We want to know.
Yeah, very good. I gave a couple of points actually to our discussion. Yeah, so we produced enough products and to give us enough forward visibility for what was initially planned based on all things we had. But there was an article in The Guardian 2 weeks ago, around the 15th, which covers both Accolade Wines and Taylor's Wines, saying that, you know, the demand has been so great that we ran out of stock, that it's been a big surprise. We've had to rush to an next production. Yeah, Australians have really jumped onto what we do. We're extremely grateful to the brands for being so forthcoming in the communication of what we do on the pack. and also to Coles Liquor Group for putting the bottles the products, but in the bottles, into floor standing display units with the messaging that says the bottle that helps save our planet, and communicating all around on the display units the benefits of the bottle and why Aussie consumers are seeing it. And we're about to actually enter Australian summer. And so, the outdoor lifestyle, the barbecue, the convenience aspect will come to be a winner for Australians. We are also proudly made from Australian recycled material. So it's material that's intercepted in homes and businesses, and then it's recycled in New South Wales, then it's made food grade to FDA and EFSA standards for European Union, United States, and then produced into bottles. So it's a really good example to show Australians that recycling does work, because it doesn't work in some instances, but it does work in some. And so our own Prime Minister recently left, Boris Johnson, appointed from Central London. He spouted the fallacy that recycling does not work. That's total nonsense. It does work in some instances, doesn't work in others. So we should focus on the areas it doesn't work in, rather than just overly simplify, and just say like, no wine is good because you've tried to drink a wine that came from a producer who had no clue what they're doing, and made wine that was totally unpalatable. So United States for us next, and shortly afterwards Canada.
Canada is so small, like you will make even more of an impact if you cover the States for sure.
Well, that was all about packaging. That was episode 36 of the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. First, I'd like to thank you, Santiago from Packamama, for joining us. Excellent conversation. Laurie from Oushinery, Seb from Troly, and we'll see you all in a few weeks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here, Santiago.
Cheers,
it was
guys.
very, very insightful.
Thank you. And whatever happens, please cut your carbon footprint, because it's the right thing to do. Take care, and thanks for having me.